The dust swirled around the wooden wagon as it rolled through the gates of Fort Bowie. Inside, a woman named Elena clutched her father's old rifle, her knuckles white against the dark metal. She was 28 years old, which might as well have been 50 in this corner of Arizona territory where most women were married with children by 20. Elena had come here with nothing but her father's army pension papers and a stubborn heart that refused to bend to anyone's will. Colonel McKay, the fort commander, had made it clear from the first day what he expected of her. Miss Rodriguez, he had said, looking at her like she was a problem that needed solving. This is a military outpost, not a boarding house for unmarried women. You need to find yourself a husband or make arrangements to return east. But Elena had nowhere to go back east. Her father, Captain Rodriguez, had died fighting Apache raiders 6 months ago. Her mother had passed when Elena was just 12. There was no family left, no money for train tickets, and certainly no desire to become some stranger's wife just to have a roof over her head. The other women at the fort whispered about her constantly. She could hear them at the washing wells and during Sunday services. They called her proud, difficult, too old to catch a good man. Some said she was cursed because she could read and write better than most of the soldiers. Others whispered that her mixed heritage made her unmarriageable to decent folk. "That girl thinks she's too good for honest work," said Mrs. Patterson, the commanding officer's wife, loud enough for Elena to hear. In my day, a woman knew her place. Elena bit her tongue and kept scrubbing the laundry. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made the gossip worse. Let them talk. She would rather wash clothes for the rest of her life than marry some drunk soldier who saw her as nothing more than a cook and bed warmer. The work was hard, but Elena was used to hard work. She took in washing, mended uniforms, and helped the fort's doctor with wounded men. Her hands were rough and her back ached every night, but she was free. That freedom was worth more than gold to her. Still, the loneliness ate at her like a slow poison. In the evenings, she would sit outside her tiny quarters and watch the married couples walking together, their children playing in the dust. She wondered sometimes what it would feel like to have someone care if she came home at night. But then she would remember the bruises on Mrs. Johnson's arms, or the way Private Miller talked to his wife like she was a dog, and the longing would pass. One morning in late October, Colonel McKay called her into his office. The room smelled of tobacco and leather, and maps covered every inch of the walls. Elena stood straight, her chin up, ready for whatever lecture he had prepared. "Miss Rodriguez," he began, shuffling papers on his desk. "I've spoken with several of the enlisted men. Sergeant Williams has expressed interest in making you an honest woman." Elena's stomach turned. She had seen how Williams looked at her, like she was a piece of meat hanging in a butcher shop. He was 20 years older, had buried 2 wives already, and drank away half his pay every month. "That's very generous of the sergeant," she said carefully, "but I must decline his offer." The colonel's face darkened. "This isn't a request, Miss Rodriguez. This is me trying to solve a problem before it becomes a bigger one. You can't stay here indefinitely without a husband." "Why not?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "I work harder than half the men here. I pay for my own food and lodging. I don't cause trouble." "You cause trouble just by existing," McKay snapped. "The men talk about you. They speculate about why a woman your age isn't married. It's disruptive to morale." Elena felt her face burn with anger and shame. "So my crime is being born a woman and having the misfortune to outlive my parents? Your crime is thinking you're special, that the rules don't apply to you." McKay stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "You have 2 weeks to accept Williams' proposal or find another husband. If you don't, I'll have you escorted to Tucson and put on the first stage east. Do I make myself clear?" Elena's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "Crystal clear, sir." That night she sat outside her quarters and stared up at the stars. The desert was quiet except for the occasional call of a coyote in the distance. She thought about her options, which seemed to shrink with each passing hour. She could marry Williams and spend the rest of her life cooking his meals and bearing his children until her body gave out. She could try to make it to Tucson with no money and no connections. Or she could do what she had been thinking about for months, just walk into the desert and let it take her. The thought wasn't as frightening as it should have been. The desert was honest, at least. It didn't pretend to care about you while slowly crushing your spirit. 3 days later, a supply wagon was heading to Tucson, and Colonel McKay decided Elena would go with it. Not as a passenger, but as additional labor to help with the goods. It was his way of making her departure as humiliating as possible. "Maybe the town will have better luck finding you a husband," he said with a cold smile. "Though I doubt it." Elena packed her few belongings in an old carpet bag. Her father's rifle, a few dresses, his army Bible, and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Everything she owned in the world fit in one small bag. The wagon train consisted of 3 heavy freight wagons loaded with supplies for Tucson's general store. There were 6 soldiers as guards, the wagon master named Joe Henley, and his assistant, driver, a young man called Tommy who couldn't be more than 17. Elena was assigned to ride in the back of the last wagon, surrounded by sacks of flour and beans. The other men barely acknowledged her presence, which suited her fine. She had no desire to make conversation with anyone. They left Fort Bowie at dawn on a Tuesday morning in November. The air was crisp and clean, and for a moment Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe Tucson would be different. Maybe there would be opportunities for a woman willing to work hard. The first day passed without incident. They made good time across the flat desert, stopping only to rest the horses and eat cold beans from a tin. Elena helped where she could, gathering firewood and tending to the animals. Joe Henley seemed impressed by her willingness to work. "You're not what I expected," he told her as they sat around the small campfire that first night. "Most ladies would be complaining about the dust and the hard ground." "I'm not most ladies," Elena replied, stirring the beans with a long wooden spoon. "No," Joe said, studying her face in the firelight. "I can see that." The second day started well, but by afternoon, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The temperature dropped, and the wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across their path. The horses grew nervous, and the men kept checking their rifles. "Apache weather," muttered one of the soldiers. "They like to attack during storms." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling air. She had heard stories about Apache raids all her life. Her father had died in one. They said the Apache could appear out of nowhere, like ghosts made of wind and shadow. By evening, they were racing against the storm. Joe wanted to make it to a way station called Willow Creek before the rain hit, but the clouds were moving faster than the wagons. "We're going to have to make camp in the open," Joe announced as the first fat raindrops began to fall. "Everyone stay close to the wagons. Keep your weapons ready." They pulled the wagons into a defensive circle and tied canvas over the supplies. Elena helped secure the ropes, her dress whipping in the wind. The storm hit just as they finished, bringing with it a darkness so complete she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. The rain came down in sheets, turning the desert floor into a muddy river. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, illuminating the landscape in stark, ghostly detail. Elena huddled under the wagon with her father's rifle, trying to stay dry and alert. That's when the Apache struck. The first she knew of the attack was a scream from Tommy, cut short by the whistle of an arrow. Then the night exploded with gunfire and war cries that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Elena rolled under the wagon and aimed her rifle toward the sounds of fighting. Lightning flashed, and she saw shapes moving between the horses, figures on horseback wielding bows and rifles. The soldiers were scattered, trying to take cover behind the wagons while returning fire. A horse reared nearby, and its rider tumbled to the ground. Elena saw her chance and fired, but the rain had dampened her powder, and the shot went wide. The Apache warrior looked directly at her, his face painted with white and black stripes that made him look like a living skull in the lightning. For a moment that seemed to last forever, they stared at each other through the storm. Then another flash of lightning, and he was gone. The battle lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the gunfire finally stopped, Elena could hear nothing but the rain and her own ragged breathing. She stayed under the wagon until dawn, her rifle ready, not knowing if she was alone or surrounded by enemies. As the sun came up, she crawled out to survey the damage. The sight that greeted her was worse than anything she could have imagined. The wagons were destroyed, their contents scattered across the muddy ground. The horses were gone. And the men. Joe Henley lay face down in a puddle 20 feet from the wagon, 3 arrows in his back. Tommy was slumped against a watt. The first thing Elena became aware of was water. Cool, precious water being poured slowly between her cracked lips. She tried to open her eyes, but the effort was too much. Everything hurt. Her head, her throat, her sunburned skin. She felt like she had been buried in sand and then dug up again. Voices spoke around her in a language she didn't recognize. The words flowed like water over stones, musical and soft. Gentle hands lifted her head and gave her more water. This time she managed to swallow without choking. When Elena finally opened her eyes, she found herself looking up at the lined face of an elderly Apache woman. The woman's hair was silver gray and braided with colorful beads. Her dark eyes were kind but watchful, studying Elena's face like she was reading a book. Elena tried to speak, but only a croak came out. The old woman made soothing sounds and brought a clay bowl to her lips. The water was the best thing Elena had ever tasted. "Where?" Elena managed to whisper. The old woman spoke in Apache, then seemed to think better of it. In heavily accented English, she said, "You safe now. Rest." Elena's eyes moved around what appeared to be a shelter made of brush and animal hides. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. She could hear voices and movement outside, the sounds of a camp going about its daily business. "How?" She tried again. "My grandson find you," the old woman said, mixing something in a small bowl. "You almost dead. Desert spirits must like you. They let you live." Elena remembered the attack, the long walk through the desert, the moment when she collapsed by the dry creek bed. She should be dead. Instead, she was alive and being cared for by the very people she had been taught to fear. "Apache?" she whispered. The old woman nodded. "Apache. I am called grandmother by everyone here. You can call me same." Over the next few days, Elena drifted in and out of consciousness. Grandmother fed her broth made from some kind of root, and gradually her strength began to return. She learned that she was in a small camp hidden in the mountains, home to perhaps 30 Apache who had refused to surrender to the reservation system. When Elena was finally strong enough to sit up and take notice of her surroundings, she met the man who had saved her life. His name was Kaya, which grandmother explained meant older brother in their language. He was perhaps 35, with long black hair and intelligent dark eyes. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by a thin scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man completely at home in the wilderness. Kaya spoke some English, learned during brief periods when his band had been forced onto reservations before escaping again. His accent was thick, but his words were carefully chosen. "You fought well," he told Elena as she sat outside grandmother's shelter trying to regain her strength. "I saw your camp after attack. You buried the dead with honor." Elena looked at him in surprise. "You were watching? Always watching? Is how we stay free." Kaya settled down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "You could have taken supplies and left them for coyotes. Instead, you showed respect for dead. This tells me what kind of person you are." "What kind is that?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. She had never thought much about her own character. Kaya considered the question. "Seriously? Strong, honorable, foolish maybe to walk into desert alone, but brave." Despite everything she had been through, Elena found herself almost smiling. "Most people just call me difficult." "Difficult can be a good thing," Kaya said. "Easy things break. Difficult things survive." As Elena recovered, she began to observe the daily life of the Apache band. What she saw challenged everything she had been told about these people. They were not the savage raiders of army propaganda. They were families trying to preserve their way of life in the face of an overwhelming enemy. The children played games. That seemed familiar. Tag, hide and seek, contests of skill with small bows. The women worked together preparing food, making clothes, caring for the young and old. The men hunted and stood guard, but they also participated in domestic life in ways that white men never did. Elena was surprised to see Kaya helping grandmother prepare a meal, grinding corn with a stone tool while discussing something serious in Apache. When he noticed her watching, he switched to English. "Grandmother says you have warrior's heart," he said, continuing his work without embarrassment. "She thinks you were sent to us for reason." "What reason?" Elena asked. Grandmother looked up from the fire where she was cooking. In her careful English, she said, "Sometimes Great Spirit sends person to teach us something. Sometimes sends person who needs to learn something. You may be both." Elena thought about this as she watched the old woman work. Grandmother moved with the efficiency of someone who had performed these tasks thousands of times. But there was also grace in her movements, a sense of connection to something larger than herself. "What could I possibly teach you?" Elena asked. "I can barely take care of myself." Kaya and grandmother exchanged a look that seemed to carry a whole conversation. "You teach by being here," Kaya said finally. "White woman who chooses death over life she doesn't want. This is something we understand. We do same thing, choose death before reservation." Elena began to understand that her presence in the camp was more significant than she had realized. To these Apache, she represented something important. Proof that not all white people were the same, that some understood the value of freedom over security. As her strength returned, Elena began to make herself useful around the camp. She helped grandmother with cooking and gathering, despite having little knowledge of desert plants and their uses. She mended clothes with skills learned from her years at Fort Bowie. Most surprisingly, she found herself teaching some of the children basic English words. "Why do they need to know English?" she asked Kaya one evening as they sat by the fire. His face grew serious. "Because this life cannot last forever. Someday they will have to live in white man's world. Better they understand his words when that time comes." Elena felt a stab of sadness at the resignation in his voice. "You've given up hope?" "Not given up. Just realistic. We are maybe last free Apache in Arizona. Every day more soldiers hunt us. Every day it gets harder to find water, game, safe places to camp. We fight because fighting is who we are, but we also know how this story ends. Then why not surrender? Go to the reservation where at least you'd be safe?" Kaya's laugh was bitter. "Safe? You think reservation is safe? My wife and children died on reservation. Disease, bad food, despair. Some things worse than death in battle." Elena felt her heart clench. She hadn't known he had lost a family. "I'm sorry. Was long time ago, 3 winters." Kaya stared into the fire. "I tried to live, white man's way. Tried to become farmer, learn their words, follow their rules. But reservation life, it kills the spirit slowly. I chose to die free rather than live as slave." Elena understood now why grandmother had said she and Kaya were similar. They were both people who had chosen the hard path over the easy one. Freedom over security, principles over comfort. "Is that why you saved me?" she asked. "Because you recognized a kindred spirit?" "Partly." Kaya looked at her directly, "Also because leaving someone to die in desert is not Apache way. We believe all life is sacred, even life of enemy." "Am I your enemy? Are you mine?" Elena considered the question seriously. A month ago she would have said yes without thinking. Apache meant danger, death, everything frightening about the frontier. But sitting here by their fire, eating food prepared by their hands, listening to their children laugh, she found her old assumptions crumbling. "No," she said finally. "I don't think you are. Then you are not mine either." As the weeks passed, Elena began to learn Apache words and customs. Grandmother was a patient teacher, showing her which plants could be eaten, how to read weather, signs in the sky, the proper way to prepare different kinds of food. Elena was a quick student, hungry for knowledge after years of having her intelligence dismissed or ignored. Kaya taught her practical skills, how to move silently through brush, how to find water in seemingly dry places, how to read the tracks left by animals and humans. He was impressed by her marksmanship with her father's rifle and began teaching her to use an Apache bow. "Your aim is good," he told her, after she managed to hit a target from 50 yards. "But you think too much before shooting. Sometimes thinking gets you killed. Trust your eyes, trust your hands." Elena found herself looking forward to these lessons. Kaya was unlike any man she had ever known. He never talked down to her, or assumed she couldn't understand something because she was a woman. When she made mistakes, he corrected her patiently. When she succeeded, he praised her honestly. More importantly, he seemed to value her opinions. In the evenings, he would ask her questions about white society, military tactics, the thinking of army commanders. Elena realized he was gathering intelligence that might help his people survive, and she found herself willing to share what she knew. "Why do soldiers always travel same routes?" he asked one night. "Makes them easy to predict." "Because their commanders don't know the land like you do," Elena explained. "They stick to mapped trails and known water sources. They're afraid of getting lost. Fear makes them predictable. Predictable makes them vulnerable." Elena began to see the war from Apache perspective. To them, the soldiers were invaders trying to destroy a way of life. 3 months had passed since Elena's rescue, and the seasons were beginning to change. The harsh summer heat was giving way to cooler days and cold nights. The Apache band had moved their camp twice, always staying ahead of the army patrols that seemed to be getting more frequent and more determined. Elena had changed too. Her hands were calloused from working with tools and weapons. Her skin was bronzed by the sun, and her body had grown strong from the physical demands of Apache life. But the changes went deeper than physical transformation. Something inside her had awakened, a confidence and sense of purpose she had never known before. The medicine raid had been a complete success. Using Elena's knowledge of military supply systems and her ability to move freely among white settlements, they had obtained not just the fever medicine they needed, but also surgical supplies and other medical equipment that grandmother put to good use. More importantly, Elena had proven herself to be a valuable member of the band. She was no longer a rescued outsider being cared for out of kindness. She was family now, with all the responsibilities and privileges that came with belonging to an Apache clan. The children called her Aunt Elena and came to her when they wanted to practice their English words. The women sought her advice on dealing with white traders. The men included her in planning discussions. Most significantly, her relationship with Kaya had evolved into something neither of them had expected. What had begun as teacher and student had grown into a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. They spent hours talking by the evening fire, sharing stories of their past lives and dreams for an uncertain future. Elena learned about Kaya's childhood, growing up in a world where Apache people moved freely across the land that was now divided by invisible lines drawn on white men's maps. He told her about his first wife, Desba, and their 2 small children who had died during a typhoid outbreak on the reservation. "I was not there when they died," he said one evening, his voice heavy with old grief. "I was working in white man's mine, trying to earn money to buy better food for them. When I came back, they were already buried. I never got to say goodbye." Elena's heart ached for his loss. "That wasn't your fault." "Maybe not. But I learned something that day. White man's way of life kills Apache spirit. Better to die fighting than to die slowly from despair." Elena understood now why Kaya had chosen to leave the reservation and join the few remaining free Apache bands. It wasn't just about physical freedom. It was about preserving something essential to his identity as a person and as a member of his people. In return, Elena shared her own story of growing up between worlds. Her father had been a career soldier who believed in the Army's mission to civilize the frontier. Her mother had been the daughter of Mexican settlers who had their own complicated relationship with both Apache and American territorial expansion. "I never fit anywhere," she told. Kaya, too Mexican for the white soldiers' wives, too American for the Mexican families in town, too independent for any man who might have wanted a wife. "I spent my whole life feeling like a stranger everywhere I went. And now? Kaya asked. Elena looked around the camp, where children played in the fading light while their mothers prepared the evening meal. She could understand much of the Apache conversation now, and she knew her place in the daily rhythms of the community. Now I feel like I'm home for the first time in my life. Their conversations often stretched late into the night, long after the rest of the camp had gone to sleep. They discussed everything: philosophy, strategy, the future of both their peoples, the nature of love and loss and hope. Elena had never had anyone in her life who valued her thoughts and opinions the IQ way Kaya did. You see things differently than most people, he told her one night. Apache or white doesn't matter. You see what is, not what you wish was true or what you fear might be true. This is rare gift. My father used to say it was a curse, Elena replied. Said I asked too many questions, thought too much about things that didn't concern me. Your father was wrong. Questions are how we learn. Thinking is how we survive. Elena began to realize that she was falling in love with Kaya, and the knowledge terrified her, not because she was afraid of love itself, but because she understood how impossible their situation was. She was a white woman living with Apache people in a time when such relationships could mean death for both of them. Moreover, she sensed that Kaya's feelings for her were deepening too, and she didn't know what to do with that knowledge. He had never shown her anything but respect, never indicated by word or gesture that he saw her as anything more than a valued member of their community. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. The uncertainty was resolved in a way Elena had never expected. It was late October when the scouts brought word that a large cavalry patrol was heading their way. The soldiers had Apache guides with them, men who had been forced to work for the army in exchange for better treatment on the reservations. These guides knew the country well and would be much harder to evade than the usual military patrols. We need to move camp immediately, Kaya told the assembled band. They are maybe 2 days behind us, but they know where we have been. We cannot use any of our usual hiding places. The band spent the rest of that day packing their belongings and preparing to move. Elena worked alongside everyone else, rolling up sleeping hides and securing supplies for transport. She had participated in camp moves before, but this felt different. There was an urgency and tension in the air that spoke of real danger. They traveled through the night using paths that seemed impossible to Elena, even after months of living in the desert. Kaya led them through narrow canyons and over rocky ridges that would leave few tracks for pursuers to follow. By dawn, they were miles from their old campsite and hidden in a canyon Elena hadn't known existed. But the respite was temporary. Within hours, the scouts reported that the cavalry patrol had found their old camp and was following their trail. Worse, the soldiers had been reinforced by additional troops from Fort Bowie. Elena felt her blood turn to ice when she heard the name of the fort. If these soldiers were from Bowie, there was a good chance that some of them would recognize her. Colonel McKay would have reported her as missing, possibly kidnapped by Apache raiders. If she was found here, the army would assume she had been held captive all this time. How many soldiers? Kaya asked the scout. Maybe 40, and 6 Apache guides. Kaya's face was grim as he considered their options. The band numbered only 30 people, and 8 of those were children too young to fight. Even if every adult was armed and ready, they would be badly outnumbered. We cannot outrun them with children and elderly, he said finally, and we cannot outfight them with so few warriors. We need different strategy. What kind of strategy? Asked Natchez. Kaya looked directly at Elena, and she felt her stomach drop as she realized what he was thinking. Maybe it is time for our white sister to go home, he said quietly. Elena felt like she had been punched in the chest. You want me to leave? I want you to live, Kaya replied. If soldiers find you here, they will think we kidnapped you. We'll give them excuse to attack without trying to talk first. But if you go to them, tell them you escaped. They'll believe I was a prisoner, Elena finished, understanding his logic even as her heart broke. And you might be able to negotiate instead of fighting. Grandmother, who had been listening to the discussion in silence, finally spoke up. The white woman has become Apache in her heart. Sending her away now would be like cutting out part of ourselves. Better to cut out part than to lose the whole body, Kaya said, though Elena could hear the pain in his voice. This is not forever. When soldiers give up search, she can come back. Elena knew he was trying to spare her feelings, but they both understood the truth. If she left now, she would never be able to return. The army would watch her too closely, and it would be too dangerous for the band to take her back. There has to be another way, she said desperately. What if we split up? Some of the band goes one direction, some another. I could go with the smaller group. And if that group is caught? Natchez asked. Then soldiers have both you and some of our people. Is worse, not better. Elena looked around the circle of faces, people who had become her family, her world, her home. The thought of leaving them felt like dying. But the thought of being responsible for their deaths was even worse. How long would I have to stay away? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Kaya wouldn't meet her eyes. Don't know. Maybe until this war ends. Maybe longer. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned Apache ways, and Apache people face difficult decisions with dignity and courage. If that's what you think is best for the people, then I'll go. Grandmother reached over and took Elena's hand in both of hers. You are very brave, daughter, and very wise. The spirits will remember your sacrifice. Elena spent the rest of the day preparing to leave the only place she had ever felt truly at home. She packed her few possessions in the same carpet bag she had carried from Fort Bowie, though now. Elena waited until the cavalry patrol was close enough to see her clearly, before she began her performance. She tore her dress deliberately, rubbed dirt on her face and hands, and mussed her hair to look like someone who had been running through the desert. Then she started walking toward them, calling out in English, "Help! Please help me!" The soldiers spotted her immediately and rode forward at a gallop. Elena recognized the lieutenant leading the patrol, a young man named Davidson, who had been stationed at Fort Bowie when she lived there. His face showed genuine shock when he realized who she was. "Miss Rodriguez, my God, you're alive." Davidson leaped down from his horse and rushed to her side. "We thought you were dead when we found the wagon train." Elena allowed herself to collapse against his horse, playing the part of an exhausted captive. "They kept me so long, moved me from camp to camp. I finally managed to escape last night." The soldiers gathered around her, offering water and asking rapid-fire questions. Elena stuck to the story she and Kaya had crafted, describing months of captivity with Apache raiders who treated her reasonably well, but refused to let her go. She made sure to emphasize that she had never been harmed, hoping this might influence how the army dealt with her captors if they were ever caught. "Which direction did you come from?" asked Sergeant Mills, the patrol's tracker. "How far to their camp?" Elena pointed vaguely southwest, away from where she knew her Apache family was hiding. "I walked all night, maybe 10 miles. It's hard to tell in the dark." Davidson wrapped his own coat around her shoulders. "Don't worry about that now. You're safe. We'll get you back to Fort Bowie and then you can tell us everything." The ride back to the fort gave Elena time to prepare for the more detailed interrogation she knew was coming. She rehearsed her story, making sure all the details were consistent. The hardest part would be hiding how much she had genuinely cared for the people who had supposedly held her prisoner. Fort Bowie looked smaller and more cramped than Elena remembered. After months of living under the open sky, the wooden buildings and walls felt confining. But she forced herself to show relief and gratitude as Davidson escorted her to the medical station. The fort's doctor, Dr. Patterson, examined her carefully and pronounced her to be in remarkably good health for someone who had supposedly been held captive for 3 months. "Amazing how well the Apache treated her," he commented to Davidson. "Usually captives come back half-starved and traumatized." Elena caught the suspicious note in his voice and realized she needed to be more careful. "They needed me healthy," she said quickly. "They planned to trade me eventually." Colonel McKay arrived at the medical station within an hour, his face a mixture of relief and irritation. Elena remembered him as a man who hated having his plans disrupted, and her unexpected survival had certainly done that. "Miss Rodriguez," he said formally, "I'm glad to see you safe. I trust you understand that your situation presents certain complications. What do you mean, sir? McKay sat down across from her, his expression serious. You've been living with hostile Apache for 3 months. The War Department will need to be satisfied that you weren't compromised. Elena felt anger flash through her, but she kept her voice calm. Compromised how, Colonel? That you didn't provide them with information about military movements, supply schedules, fort defenses, that you didn't collaborate with the enemy. Elena understood now. She wasn't being welcomed back as a rescued captive. She was being treated as a potential traitor. The irony was bitter, considering that she had indeed provided the Apache with intelligence, but only to help them avoid unnecessary conflicts. I told them nothing, she lied smoothly. I was kept under guard at all times. They spoke their own language around me. I learned nothing about their plans or movements. Over the next several days, Elena was questioned repeatedly by different officers. Each time she stuck to her story, gradually adding small details that made her account more believable. She described being moved from camp to camp, never staying in one place long enough to learn the lay of the land. She spoke of being watched, constantly, never left alone, never trusted with any information. The questions grew more specific and more accusatory as time went on. Did she know how many warriors were in each band? Had she seen weapons caches or supply stores? Did she overhear discussions about planned raids? Had any of the Apache men shown inappropriate interest in her? This last question came from Colonel McKay himself, and Elena could see the ugly suspicion in his eyes. He was asking whether she had been sexually assaulted, but he was also asking whether she might have willingly entered into a relationship with one of her captors. No, sir, Elena replied firmly. The Apache who held me were honorable in that regard. I was never mistreated. Honorable, McKay repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that description. You seem remarkably sympathetic toward people who held you prisoner for 3 months. Elena realized she was walking into dangerous territory. I'm trying to be objective, sir. They could have killed me, but they didn't. They could have hurt me in other ways, but they didn't. I see no point in exaggerating my treatment for dramatic effect. McKay studied her for a long moment. No, I suppose you wouldn't. You always were a practical woman. After a week of interrogation, Elena was finally cleared of any charges of collaboration. But she quickly discovered that her troubles were far from over. The other women at the fort treated her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Some seemed to think she must have been traumatized in ways she wasn't admitting. Others clearly believed she had somehow enjoyed her time with the Apache. The worst part was the constant questions about her future. Now that she had been rescued, what did she plan to do with her life? You could still marry Sergeant Williams, suggested Mrs. Patterson, the colonel's wife. He's asked about you several times since you've been back. Elena shuddered at the thought. After experiencing the respect and equality she had known in Apache society, the idea of becoming Williams' property was even more repugnant than before. I need time to recover from my ordeal, she said diplomatically. Marriage is the furthest thing from my mind right now. But Elena knew she couldn't put off such decisions indefinitely. The army wasn't going to support her forever, and there were limited options for unmarried women on the frontier. She began to feel trapped in a life that no longer fit her, surrounded by people who would never understand who she had become. The breaking point came 3 weeks after her return to Fort Bowie. Elena was helping in the laundry when she overheard 2 soldiers talking about the increased Apache patrols. Heard they found one of them camps up in the Chiricahuas, said Private Johnson. Wiped out the whole bunch. Men, women, children, didn't matter. Colonel says it's the only way to deal with hostiles. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Which camp? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Johnson looked at her strangely. Don't rightly know, ma'am. Just heard it was a small band that had been hiding out in the mountains. Elena excused herself and stumbled outside, her heart pounding with fear. Could it have been Kaya's band? Had her people been found and killed while she was here, safe behind fort walls? That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling of her small quarters, fingering Kaya's medallion beneath her dress. The not knowing was agony. Were her Apache family alive or dead? Was Kaya still free? Or had he died fighting to protect the people she loved? Elena made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months before. She was going to leave Fort Bowie and try to find out what had happened to her Apache family. If they were dead, she would mourn them properly. If they were alive, she would find a way to help them, even if it meant living as an outlaw. But she needed to be smart about it. Simply disappearing would bring search parties and more trouble for any Apache she might encounter. She needed a legitimate reason to leave the fort, and she needed to avoid suspicion. The answer came in the form of a supply wagon heading to Tucson. Elena volunteered to escort a shipment of medical supplies to the territorial hospital there, claiming she wanted to contribute to the war effort by helping care for wounded soldiers. Colonel McKay approved the assignment readily. "Good to see you putting your experience to productive use," he said. "Perhaps helping our wounded boys will help you process your own ordeal." Elena bit her tongue and accepted the assignment gratefully. The wagon would take her within a day's ride of the area where she thought Kaya's band might be hiding. 2 days before her departure, Elena was surprised by a visitor. Sergeant Williams appeared at her quarters one evening, dressed in his best uniform and carrying a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. "Miss Rodriguez," he said formally, "I was wondering if you might take a walk with me." Elena wanted to refuse, but she realized that alienating Williams now might complicate her plans to leave. "Of course, Sergeant." They walked toward the edge of the fort as the sun set over the desert. Williams was clearly nervous, clearing his throat several times before speaking. "Elena, Miss Rodriguez, I want you to know how glad I am that you came back safe. These past months thinking you were dead or worse, it made me realize some things." Elena felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. "What things, Sergeant?" Williams stopped walking and turned to face her. "That life is short out here, that when you find something good." Elena rode through the night, guided by stars and the memory of paths Kaya had shown her months before. The desert was alive with sounds she had learned to recognize during her time with the Apache. The distant call of an owl, the rustle of small creatures moving through the brush, the whisper of wind through canyon walls. She pushed her horse as hard as she dared, knowing that every hour might mean the difference between finding her Apache family alive or finding their bodies scattered across some hidden battlefield. The image of Kaya lying dead in the dust haunted her thoughts, driving her forward even as exhaustion made her sway in the saddle. Dawn found her at the entrance to Skeleton Canyon, where she and Kaya had once spent an entire day learning the different calls of desert birds. Elena pulled up her horse and listened carefully. In the distance, barely audible, came the soft whistle that meant friend approaching, the signal Kaya had taught her months ago. Elena answered with the proper response, her heart hammering with hope. Within minutes, she heard the soft footfall of an unshod horse moving through the rocks above her. A familiar voice called out in Apache, then switched to English. "Elena, is it really you?" She looked up to see Natchez mounted on a paint pony, his rifle ready but not aimed at her. His face showed amazement mixed with suspicion. "It's me," she called back. "I escaped from the fort. I came to warn you. They're rounding up all Apache people. You have to run now before they find you." Natchez rode down to meet her, studying her face carefully. "You look different, softer. Fort life has changed you." Elena realized he was right. 3 weeks of regular meals and sleeping in a bed had erased some of the lean hardness she had developed during her months in the desert. But more than that, the constant stress of maintaining her false story had worn at her spirit. "Is Kaya alive?" she asked desperately. "Is grandmother? Are they safe?" "Alive? Yes." "Safe?" Natchez shook his head. "No one is safe now. Come. They will want to see you." He led her through a maze of rock formations to a hidden camp Elena had never seen before. It was smaller than the one she remembered, and she immediately noticed that several faces were missing from the group that gathered to greet her. Grandmother emerged from a shelter made of canvas and brush, her weathered face showing joy and concern in equal measure. She embraced Elena like a daughter returning from a long journey. Foolish girl, the old woman said in her accented English. You were safe among your own people. Why did you come back to share our danger? Because they are my people, Elena replied, meaning every word. And I couldn't bear not knowing what happened to you. Kaya appeared from behind one of the shelters and Elena's heart nearly stopped. He was thinner than she remembered, and there was a new scar across his right forearm. But he was alive, and his eyes lit up with an emotion he didn't try to hide when he saw her. You came back, he said simply. I promised I would, Elena replied, though they both knew she had made no such promise. Kaya stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion and strain in his face. You should not have come. Is more dangerous now than ever. That's why I'm here. Geronimo has surrendered. The army is rounding up all Apache people to send them to reservations in Florida. You have maybe 2 days before they find this camp. A murmur of distress went through the gathered people. Several of the men began talking rapidly in Apache. Elena caught enough words to understand they were debating their limited options. What happened to the others? She asked quietly. I count only 20 people here. Kaya's face darkened. Some decided to surrender after Geronimo gave up. They thought if they turned themselves in, they would be treated better than those who continued to fight. And were they? We don't know. They were taken away in wagons. We have not seen them since. Elena felt sick, knowing what she knew about the army's intentions. Those who had surrendered expecting mercy were probably already on trains heading for distant reservations. Grandmother called for a council meeting, and the entire band gathered around a small fire as the sun climbed higher in the desert sky. Elena listened as the options were debated in a mixture of Apache and English. They could surrender and hope for lenient treatment, knowing that surrender likely meant permanent exile from their homeland. They could fight a final battle against overwhelming odds, dying as free people on the land they loved. Or they could try to escape to Mexico, where they might find refuge with Apache bands that had fled south in previous years. Mexico is far, argued one of the older men. We have children, elderly. Many would die on such journey. And if we stay here, all will die when soldiers come, replied Goyakla. At least in Mexico, some might survive. Elena listened to the discussion with growing dread. Every option seemed hopeless. Then an idea began to form in her mind. Dangerous, probably impossible, but perhaps their only real chance. What if you didn't travel as Apache? She said suddenly. The conversation stopped, and everyone turned to look at her. I don't understand, said Kaya. Elena took a deep breath, knowing she was about to propose something that might sound crazy. The soldiers are looking for hostile Apache bands. They're not looking for Mexican families fleeing the war. She could see understanding beginning to dawn on several faces. You're suggesting we disguise ourselves, Natchez said slowly. More than that, I'm suggesting I guide you south as your employer, a white woman traveling with her Mexican servants and their families. We'd have to change your appearance, coach some of you in Spanish if you don't already speak it, and travel during daylight like people with nothing to hide. The idea was audacious, but Elena could see it might work. Several of the Apache people had Spanish ancestry from centuries of intermarriage along the border. With the right clothes and preparation, they could pass for Mexican refugees. Too dangerous for you, Kaya said immediately. If soldiers discover the deception, they will hang you as traitor. They'll hang me anyway if they catch me here, Elena pointed out. At least this way I'm useful. Grandmother had been listening to the discussion with the thoughtful expression Elena remembered well. Finally, the old woman spoke. This plan has merit, but it requires something from all of us. We must be willing to put aside our pride and pretend to be what we are not. Is it worse than death? Asked Goyakla. Is it worse than slavery on distant reservation? Elena spent the rest of the day helping prepare for what might be their last chance at freedom. Using supplies from the abandoned fort and items scavenged from previous raids, they created a convincing disguise operation. The warriors cut their long hair and dressed in the cotton shirts and pants worn by Mexican laborers. The women adopted the rebozos and long skirts of Mexican peasants. Children were coached to call the adults by Spanish names rather than Apache ones. Elena transformed herself as well, putting on the traveling dress of a prosperous rancher's wife. She pinned her hair up in the style favored by respectable white women and practiced the imperious manner she would need to convince any soldiers they encountered that she was in charge of this group. The most difficult part was coaching everyone in their roles. Kaya became Carlos, Elena's trusted foreman. Grandmother became Señora Maria, an elderly woman fleeing violence in Sonora with her extended family. Each person was given a Spanish name,